Welcome everybody. This week we're talking about reverse engineering your database objects to a relational model. Surprise, surprise, in Oracle SQL Developer. And again, I'm going to try to aim this for the 10 to 15 minute range. That's my contact info there. You can find me online on the Twitters at @JeffSmith, or feel free to email me. Just make sure you get the Jeff.D.Smith part, because there's lots of us Jeff Smith types at Oracle. Really quickly, SQL Developer, I'm running version 4.1. Technically, I'm running version 4.1.1. That was released July of this year. Everything I'm about to show you has been possible in the tool, I think, since at least version 3.0. And if you don't run SQL Developer today, all you need is a computer that can run the Java JDK. For the version I'm running, Java 8. If you can't run Java 8 on your machine, you can also run an older version of SQL Developer with Java 7. For 95% of you, or for 90% of you at least, that's almost always going to be Windows. I'm on Windows 7. I have friends that are on 8, 8.1, and Windows 10, and they tell me that they too are running SQL Developer, so you should be good there. I also have SQL Developer on a Mac. It runs just fine, actually runs even better than it does on Windows. And we also support all of your Linux and Unix distributions, at least all the ones that support Java. Everything I'm showing to you today is available to you at no additional cost over your database license. And if your database license is a free one, then it's still no additional cost. You're covered by your Oracle database support contract. So if that's current, you can open service requests with My Oracle support on SQL Developer. So here's the versions. I thought I had a slide here for Data Modeler. So not to complicate things, but I'm showing you a data modeling feature, and I'm going to be showing it to you from inside SQL Developer, but we have a separate tool called SQL Developer Data Modeler, which is our design tool, and we ship that feature inside of SQL Developer itself, and that's where I'm going to show you these features at play, because it gives you one additional way to import database objects to a model. And if you're wondering, should you be doing the data modeling inside SQL Developer itself or download the standalone tool? If your task, or if your job, or if your thing that you're trying to do is 90% design and data modeling, go ahead and download that standalone application. If you're generally in the database all the time anyway, and you're just occasionally building diagrams by doing a reverse engineer for reporting purposes, or if you just want to quickly spec out a table, go ahead and just do that inside SQL Developer. Because again, the feature set between the two are 100% the same. And really the only thing you're giving up by running it inside of SQL Developer is the interface is shared. So some of the menuing systems are a little bit different. And of course, you're sharing memory with SQL Developer when you're doing the diagramming stuff. But for most people, that is not a big deal. So what I actually want to show you folks today, it's called reverse engineering. So you've got an existing system somewhere. That could be just a DDL script that's been left behind, or it could be a live database, and you want to create a data model, or what we call a relational design, so that you can easily see what's going on in the system. So for running data dictionary reports, which is a fancy way of saying, show me the tables and columns and constraints and indexes and foreign keys, and when it's more than just one or two objects, reading it in a script's no fun. It's a lot easier to see that visually, which is where I think the modeling stuff really comes into play. So a lot of folks also do data modeling and architecture work as a job, and that's not so much reverse engineering. That's building stuff from scratch, and the tool's great at that as well, but that's not the focus of today's talk. So all that said, to get started, if you want to reverse engineer, the first thing you need to do in SQL Developer is open the Data Modeler component. So that's View, Data Modeler, browser, and that will open, that will open this panel right here. Just give me 1 second. I forgot to turn on my Zoom tool, which if you've seen me talk before, you know I'm addicted to. Oops. Yeah, it'll open this panel right here. And where we're going to be talking at is inside this node right here, inside the logical model. Now, we're not going to be in the logical model. We're going to be in, the relational model. And I don't have one yet. So I'm going to activate that. So what I have here is I've got my normal SQL Developer stuff, my tables, my connections, all that good stuff. And over here, I have a design that's completely empty and blank. There's nothing in it. So one thing I can do is just actually select a few tables over here and drag them over. And if I hide the database stuff and just look at the modeler interface, now I see I have 3 tables. And now that I'm in the design, I can do all of the modeling stuff. So for example, I can say preview for me the DDL, so I can see exactly what it imported. And as I click on objects in here, that DDL refreshes. So this is just for demo purposes. There's not a lot going on here. But if there were partitions, it would have imported the partitions. If it had a bunch of indexes and constraints and synonyms and comments, all of that would have been imported as well. And if I want to make changes to these objects, I simply double click on them. That opens the design interface. I can come in here and add a bunch of columns. And define those. So I've got my column 4 and column 5 here. So I'm not doing stuff in the database anymore. I'm doing stuff in the design. So I've shown you one way to reverse engineer stuff. That's by dragging and dropping. I'm going to undo that work I just did. Yep. So I'm back to the way I brought it in. Let me show you the other way you can reverse engineer. So in Data Modeler standalone, you would just do file, import, but in SQL Developer, you say file, Data Modeler, import. And so I have a couple of different sources I can choose from. So if you've actually used Oracle Designer, you can connect to the Oracle Designer repository and import the data models from there. You can import from a Ddl file. So that's just a fancy way of saying, you know, a script that has your create or replace statements in it. So we can read that metadata and turn that into a design. And you can also say data dictionary, which actually means a database. So the data dictionary you're running inside a database. Your connection names will probably be blank. So you can import, hitting the import button here does not import the objects from the database. It'll import your connections from SQL Developer if this is blank. Or you can hit the add button to define a connection. So I'm going to choose a connection, hit next. So this is querying all of the schemas in that database. And so maybe I want to import from multiple schemas, which I'm more than able to do. So I'm going to import from HR, and I've got a demo user. I'm going to, and a SQL Dev demo. That one. All right. And if you've got more than one design open, you need to tell us what you want to import it to. But by default, it imports it to the one that's active in the tool. Now it's going to bring up a list of all of this stuff across those objects. So I could just say, give me all the tables. And maybe you do want a couple of the views. and whatever else you want to choose from here. Oh, by the way, right here, if you're doing an import of a very large database, and by very large, I don't mean the amount of data in it. I'm speaking specifically to the number of objects. So one partition table with 30,000 partitions, you're actually importing 30,000 objects. And a lot of times when you're creating models and reports, you don't care about the physical detail stuff like storage and that kind of sort of thing. So you might want to disable importing the partitions just to speed up that reverse engineer. I'm not going to do that because I do have some partitions, but not a ton. So come in here and turn that back on. Thanks for the tweet, David. So we're also doing a Twitter conversation as this is going, so feel free to provide running commentary if you want. I'll probably catch up on that in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to hit finish, and that's going to bring all those objects into my design. So this takes some horsepower. We have to bring in all of that information from the data dictionary. So it's running a bunch of queries. We're converting that and storing that in XML files, and then visually adding these objects to your design. And before it does all of that, it wants to know if it's okay, since there's already stuff in this design, if we merge this stuff in. So I didn't have these tables before, and it's asking, can I have your permission to add these as new tables in your design? And I'm going to say yes. And now they're in here, and you might be a little bit confused. You're like, hey, Jeff just added a bunch of stuff, but I don't see any new pretty boxes here. So this diagram is much larger than what's just visible here. And if I back out, I can see more stuff. So there's a little feature in here that I used to call the door of the Explorer feature, but now I realize that made me sound really weird. But it's called the Navigator. And that gives you a kind of map overview of your design. So you can see where stuff is and actually click into it. Or I could also come over here in the tree and right click and say go to diagram, and it would navigate me to that object in the diagram. So if you've done your reverse engineer and you're like, hey, my stuff is missing, you might just need to zoom out a bit. Now, I am often, well, it's not me, the tool is often the bearer of bad news. So if we come down here, you see these pretty little lines. And a lot of times when you're doing this reverse engineer to your diagrams, that's really what you want, are the pretty little lines, because that tells you how this object is related to that other object. And a lot of times you'll do these reverse engineers, you're not going to see pretty little lines, but you know in your heart of hearts that these objects are related. Well, what probably has happened is someone a long, long time ago who didn't really understand databases built this system and put all of the relationships in the application code itself and not in the database. So the database has no idea that these three tables are related, even though any sane person looking at them could probably guess that they are. I'm not sane, but I'm close to it, so I can guess that these are related. I've got a daddy table and tables called child, and they've got common column names. So the other thing you can do if you get to this situation and you're kind of desperate, you can right click on your model and you can say discover foreign keys. And I'm going to uncheck bunch of these because I only wanted to create discovered foreign keys on column 1. Should have found those. Did I do it wrong? This is the fun of doing live demo, when it doesn't do what you told it to do. Discover foreign keys. And it should have found SQL Dev Demo, no FKs, child 1. No? Oh, I'm going to cheat. 1 second. So you can have as many relational designs as you want. And back in here, this is relational 2. Discover foreign keys. Yep. So of course now it works. All right, so it's saying column 1 here is a primary key, and it's finding that column in these other tables because it's got the same data type and the same column name. And that's very common. Sometimes those application developers get clever and they're like, oh, we'll just use the same column name all over the place, and that's how we'll remember that these things are related. So just another trick here, you can come in and right-click and say layout, layout, auto layout. So a lot of times those lines overlap and it's kind of hard to figure out what's what. So I've discovered these relationships. We've guessed that these are related. You could agree with this relationship and say, let's make it permanent. So if I click save, and here, it won't save it to the database. It'll save it in my design. And if I wanted to see what that would do to the database, I can say sync the database with my model, but you can also say sync the model with my database. In this case, I want to make the database look like what's in my model. So I tell it what database to go do that sync with. Okay, so it's going to find, I think, foreign keys. So it's telling me, hey, we're getting ready to add foreign keys here. And if you're not sure what that really is going to look like, you can hit the Ddl preview button and you can see exactly what it's going to do. It's going to alter these tables and add constraints. Now, if you're using this feature, I would use it just to help with the pretty picture part. And not necessarily use it to go put those foreign keys in your database, especially if you're in a production application. If you screwed up the design at the beginning, just going in and adding those foreign keys later might break things. So definitely test that. Don't do this because I just showed this to you, but this is how the compare and sync actually works. You can make these changes permanent if you'd like. Let's see, anything else I want to show around reverse engineering? So I showed it to you from a live database. You can drag and drop. You can do the import. You can also point to a file. The other trick, if you do a reverse engineer and you've got a driving table and you want it to kind of follow that referential integrity, you can do a control drag and drop and it will figure out what else it needs to bring in. So if I pull this from... So for example, I know if I bring in the departments table, departments is related to employees and employees is related to departments and locations and all that stuff. So I'm just going to take departments and control drag that. So control drag, holding the control key down, using the mouse to drag it over. it won't import just, oops, I did that to the wrong one. I meant to do it here. Control drag here. So it didn't just bring in departments, it also brought in employees and job history, because that was the dependency tree it was able to walk. Okay, so one last thing to show, and then I'm going to cut this off because I like to keep these videos on the short side since they're being recorded, and we'll take as many questions as you want. In version 4.1 of the tool, which released again in May, and then we had an update in July 4.1.1, but you need at least 4.1. If you're in SQL Developer and you look at a table that has referential integrity defined in the database, you can open that table in SQL Developer, and we added a new page in here called Model, which just builds that diagram for you. Again, if there's no referential integrity in the database, when you pull up this this diagram, it's just going to show the departments table with nothing else. I said one last thing in this, but I do have one last thing. If your boss asks you for an ERD, confirm that they mean an entity relationship diagram. And if then they say yes, and you give them this, and they're not happy, this is not an ERD. This is a relational diagram. Relational designs have tables and foreign keys in them. An entity relationship design has entities and relations. That's a logical model. So to get to that, you can't click this button here and say engineer to logical model. This is an ERD. And you can make this ERD look a couple different ways. And you can change the look and feel of these diagrams drastically. You can change the colors. You can add pictures, like actual pictures. You can move them around. You can do all kinds of stuff. But that's going to blow out this demo to like an hour. So I want to end the recording, and then we'll take questions. So later this afternoon, you'll find this up on YouTube. Feel free to share that with the people that weren't able to make it.